This program is brought to you by Saxo, your trusted pathway to global investment opportunities.
Welcome to Australia's Economic Outlook 2023. Together with the Australian newspaper, Sky News brought together the biggest business minds in the country. It comes at a pivotal time for our economy. There's a high inflation, high interest rate environment. It's a time when productivity and wages are really dominating the electoral and news cycle. The day started with a keynote address from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Welcome to Australia's Economic Outlook 2023.
The combination of high inflation and rising interest rates will see the weakest 2 years for the global economy in over 2 decades outside of the GFC and the pandemic. Tight financial conditions following recent bank collapses abroad are adding to the risks. Australia is not immune to any of these challenges, but we are extremely well placed to navigate them. We have both natural advantages and, under this government, the plans to capitalise on them. Central to this is our vision for Australia as a renewable energy superpower. It's an investment in our energy sovereignty, our economic self-reliance and our security. And the clean energy transformation is also the biggest element of our economic growth plan. Reducing input costs for existing businesses, powering a new generation of advanced manufacturing jobs in our regions and suburbs, creating new export markets for value-added renewable technologies. And through our new Hydrogen Head Start program we announced in the budget, ensuring that we can not only sustain but grow large-scale energy-intensive industry and transport while still cutting emissions and achieving net zero. Exporting green hydrogen, but also using it to produce and export green steel, green aluminium, green ammonia. All of this critical to our future economic growth. And in order to ensure this growth is sustained and shared over the long term, Australia needs to lift our game on productivity, something the Reserve Bank Governor mentioned this week. When we came to government, not only did we inherit $1 trillion in debt, we also inherited the worst decade of productivity performance on record. So our economic task is not just to clear away the waste and strengthen the budget. It's to modernise the economy so we can maximise our natural competitive advantages. This is where, as a country, we need a smarter and a more strategic approach to productivity than the self-defeating model that says workers should be expected to do more with less or work longer for less. That's especially important in the context of labour-intensive sectors like the caring economy, which already represents some 10% of our workforce and is set to double in size before 2050. Too often, the economic debate about boosting productivity is conducted only in the very narrow terms of things the government should be abolishing or eliminating or undoing. Now, of course, we should always be looking for efficiencies. We should always be mindful of unnecessary barriers or overlap. But in the decade ahead, all of us need to think much bigger than this, because the economic change underway is far bigger than this. Above all, the way we use, apply and share technology will be absolutely critical, not just in the big firms, but in millions of small and medium businesses and in the care and support economy. We need to think about ways that technology can empower workers, freeing people up from the routine parts of their job, basic data entry, record keeping, paperwork, and giving them back that time to focus on producing and innovating and caring and educating. There are substantial productivity gains we can achieve if businesses have the confidence to adopt new technologies earlier and more widely. When I think about the 3 big changes underway in our economy that I've touched on briefly today, the clean energy transformation, breakthroughs in technology and growth in the care and support economy, I see cause for urgency and reason for optimism. These 3 elements are central to our future prosperity and our future productivity.
Now, joining the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, political editor of Sky News Australia, Andrew Plimnell.
So you've had 11 interest rate hikes since you've become PM.
Good start, Andrew.
How's that narrow path to avoid recession going?
I'm very positive and optimistic about the future. You forgot that there was one beforehand.
I thought you'd mention it.
You forgot there was one beforehand. But interest rates began rising and were anticipated, of course, that they would increase. That was foreshadowed prior to the election. Interest rates were never going to stay at 0.1. That was never going to happen. So it is placing pressure on families, and it's placing pressure on mortgage holders. We acknowledge that. But I'm very optimistic for the reasons that I outlined, and I'll add another one of why I'm optimistic as well. Our location for so long has been seen as a disadvantage for a long time. You know, this island continent located where we are, it is now a massive advantage. And one of the reasons for our international engagement is that we're located very close to the fastest growing region of the world in human history. What that represents is massive markets, a growing middle class to our north, and that represents real opportunity if we get it right, if we seize those opportunities.
Why did the budget predict the cash rate to stay at 3.85%? I mean, it's wrong a month later.
Well, that's a question for the Treasury Department, and I'm sure Mr Kennedy will be able to answer that. The Reserve Bank, of course, makes these decisions independently of government, as you know, and that's not the only prediction on interest rates that have not been correct. It's not as incorrect as the one saying there'd be no increases till 2024. So these things are all relative.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Is he gone then, Philip Lowe?
Well, as much as I love Sky News during the day, before weird stuff happens as the dark comes down, I've got to say. But as much as I love Sky News, you're not getting that exclusive here, even though I know that no one would be able to keep it in this room. So those decisions, down the track. But
mid-year, the Treasurer said, so it's kind of mid-year, I was thinking.
Not really. Not really. Although Laura said we were halfway through the term. We're only a year in. We only have 3-year terms.
So no early election. OK. All right. So
there you go. There's your exclusive.
I'll believe that when I see it.
I think 3 years are too short as it is. So I'm not contemplating an early election.
Thanks so much for your time, Pete.
Thanks, mate.
John, great. Many thanks for your time. This is the first time you've seen Crown since it was bought by Blackstone late last year. You've been to Australia before many times. What's your impression?
Of this hotel?
Of the whole thing that you bought, the whole box and dice. Perth, Melbourne, Sydney.
It's amazing. I mean, this is a company that is central to these communities. Melbourne in particular, just the scale of the asset, right? 6 million square feet. All those hotel rooms, all that entertainment. It needs some capital. It has gone through a tough period. The company's gone through a tough period, and we're very focused on fixing that.
Looking at the way in which the US economy, inflation, interest rates, predictions of recession, how does that look right now?
Well, maybe I'll give a little bit of optimism. I would say, first off, in the US at least, inflation is coming down. And, we see it in our portfolio companies. We see it in shipping costs. Wages have been stickier, 7% 6 months ago, down to 5.5%, but our forward look says it's going lower. If you look at US CPI at 4.9%, the most recent number, and you strip out shelter, rental housing costs, which are lagging, it's just 3.4%. So I think you're going to continue to see inflation come down, at least in the U.S. You're seeing it in a number of European countries. Here it's been a little stickier. But that wage price spiral, which was discussed earlier, I don't think that's the dynamic we have. And central banks have moved. They were a little late, obviously, but they've moved pretty aggressively. And that medicine is slowing things down.
So Blackstone right now has a war chest, as you describe, of $194 billion US.
Yeah.
At what time do you deploy that war chest? Or is it a matter of trying to hang on and wait for perhaps even better opportunities to come down if prices do deflate from here?
Yeah. I think you want to be open for investing before they put out the all clear sign. You know, in my theory of the case, inflation has come down. The economy's been fairly resilient in the U.S. and in most of the world. But the Fed is going to keep rates elevated, and then other central banks have to follow. And that's going to lead to an economic slowdown. And then the regional banking systems tighten credit as well.
Tell me about the regional banking system in America.
So the regional banking system in America, what's really interesting is when you think about a banking crisis, you typically think about a credit crisis where somebody lent too much money to subprime borrowers. The house was worth $300,000. They lent $400,000. In the case of the two big banks that failed in the U.S., First Republic, Silicon Valley Bank, they owned U.S. Treasuries and super prime mortgages to wealthy people. They didn't have credit losses. They were just mismatched because the duration of those assets was 17 years. And their depositors, when they got nervous, could take the money out in 17 minutes, right? And so that created a huge issue. The good news is I think policymakers can deal with this because it's not an underlying credit problem. But the bigger issue, which I was talking about, is these banks are going to be more cautious in extending credit. So when you combine the Fed keeping rates elevated, keeping cost of capital elevated, and the regional banks pulling back so there's less credit available, that's what I think will take some oxygen out of the room and slow the economy.
So is there a credit squeeze as a result of that? Is it a squeeze, or is it really that they turn the taps off? Because that literally almost created the global financial crisis.
Yeah, this is much different than them. Back then we had an enormous amount of excessive leverage and a lot of credit problems. We don't have that. We have a Fed-induced slowdown, and in the rest of the world, you're seeing it here, you're seeing it in Europe. Central banks are tightening to kill off inflation. They're going to do that. We'll see economies slow. But we don't have the imbalances of 08, 09. Back then, housing was way over leveraged. Commercial real estate was way over leveraged. The banks were much more leveraged than they are today. So I think we have to recognize it's tough to sort of fight the tape. When you have tight credit, it will result in a slowdown, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be as deep as what we experienced 15 years ago.
In your heart, I can hear that you're an optimist. Tell me about the competition. Do you have to be highly competitive to be successful in your game?
I think in anything you have to be highly competitive. You know, I think if you're an artist or you're a teacher or whatever it is, you want to be the best at what you do. And in our business, it's very competitive. Raising the capital from institutions, you have to have higher returns than others. Winning transactions to invest capital, doesn't matter if it's in real estate or in companies or infrastructure, you've got to compete. And so that's the reason why I've been on the plane for the last 6-7 days. My team has not given me a lot of rest and sleep time, but I want us to be as successful here in Australia as possible.
John Gray, great to chat to you today. Many thanks for your time.
Ross, thank you so much. Thank you all.
This program is brought to you by Uber, providing flexible earnings opportunities to 150,000 Australians. Authorised by Uber Australia.
Our Sky News business editor, Ross Greenwood, led a discussion on traditional industries, the pressure that they are under to do more and more with less and less.
And I am joined on stage by Kieran Carruthers, the Chief Executive of Crown Resorts, Lisa Zembrot, the Principal and Senior Director of Schneider Electric Sustainability Business, and also Guy DeBell from Fortescue Future Industries, and a range of other things as well. Guy, you've heard a lot of talk here today about productivity. Of course, your remit in the past has been to look at Australia's economy and through the eyes of the change that we've heard, particularly the Prime Minister talking about the energy transition. Just tell me whether that is going to add or detract from Australia's inflation story and also its I guess the whole notion of where we go to with productivity.
I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for us, as the Prime Minister talked about, as becoming a green energy superpower. So one key aspect to think about is, which we haven't in this country for a while, is actually we have a huge capacity for cheap green energy, which is an input into basically every business. So if you've got cheap energy, and particularly cheap green energy, then that gives us a huge advantage over most other places in the world to do a bunch of stuff that we haven't done for quite a long time, and the Prime Minister talked about this. So we can move up the value chain rather than just digging up iron ore and shipping it to China like Fortescue does, obviously, and Andrew Forrest is obviously very eyeing off the opportunity to move up that value chain. So if you can deploy cheap energy into anything, then that gives us a much bigger advantage than we've had for a long time. So it gives us the capacity to move up the value chain, move into areas of manufacturing that we haven't been into for a long time.
So, Lisa, I want to come to you because you are quite unique in some ways. You work for perhaps one of the oldest electricity companies in the world. Schneider Electric was created really back in the early 1800s and went into electricity not long after Edison really invented it. And so the history of your business and the way in which it's transformed itself over a period of time is also quite some story. You heard the Prime Minister say earlier that you've got to have ambitions, you've got to have goals. When you sit back and look at Australia's energy transition, how confident are you that Australia can meet its targets?
Well, Australia has a really unique opportunity as a result of its fantastic natural resources. So we have the opportunity to build our local supply chains utilising local-made steel and aluminium and making use of the natural resources and minerals that we have here. And with that, we actually have a really great and unique opportunity. Not only that, but we also have a lot of land, right? So we've got lots of land, really good wind, really good solar irradiation as well, which means we get a lot of electricity from every solar panel that we install relative to some other areas of the world. So we have a really quite unique opportunity in order to, that makes me quite confident, which is part of the reason I continue to stay here in Australia and put the talents that I've built over the last 20 years in the energy industry here to use in Australia, because I truly believe that we've got an opportunity to do something quite unique.
So, Kieran, one of the big issues for Australia right now, which places enormous pressure on this transition of energy, is population. Population growth in Australia is rising fast. 1.5 million people the government is forecasting in the next 5 years. Housing is an issue, but the fact of the matter is that in this business here that you're in, this is actually a benefit for you, isn't it? Though there may be pressures in other areas from population, the more population, the more tourists, the more everything you've got coming through this country, though it might create pressures in other areas, is actually music to your ears.
Well, correct. And obviously with the fantastic assets that we have, there are a couple of things where we need that, both growth and population, and I think Australia is one of the fastest growing populations in the developed world. Fantastic for us in terms of a new customer base, but also the skilled labour that we need, the kind of team workers, team members that we need in the culinary side, housekeeping, hotels, on the gaming side, the entertainment, retail. There's a lot of work that we do to develop that locally within our Crown College, but the need to bring in more skilled labour, people like myself, not from around here, long time association with Australia, but 10 months living in the country. The need to grow that population, the need to bring those skills in, the need to bring tourists in, it's critical to the success of our business going forward.
There's the regulatory issues that face you as the new owner of Crown. trying to work your way through this business? Because in other places you've been, Macau most recently, you're in running Wind there. Just explain to me the differences of running this business under those constraints as compared with how you've run other operations in the past.
We can and we will succeed in this market under this regulatory framework. We will have to change the way the industry operates. We have to change, certainly and rightfully so, the way this company has operated in the past. And by focusing on the fact that we are an integrated resort, we are not a casino. It's a part of the entertainment offering, but it's not the offering that we have. And that's true at all of our properties. It opens us up to a wide range of people who, and I speak to, in Melbourne now, I ask people, when was the last time you were at Crown? I'm not really a punter, I don't go there. There's 52 restaurants and bars. You could go to a different one every week and never go near the casino and still enjoy the services and experiences we offer. So we will be successful, and we are leading the charge in terms of how this industry will be run in Australia and globally.
Kieran Carruthers, Lisa Zembrot, Guy DeBell, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Russ.
Thanks for having me.
Well done, guys.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Crown Resorts, proud partner of Australia's economic outlook.
Our next panel was hosted by the Australian newspaper's editorial director, Claire Harvey. She spoke to tech business leaders about artificial intelligence and how this Labor government's industrial relations reforms are affecting how they do business.
It feels pretty intimidating, the level of upskilling we're going to have to do just to, for example, staff the submarine program that Australia has signed up to. In this changing geopolitical environment, the cyber workforce is going to need to be vast, for not only within every company but across the economy more broadly. How does tech that's not related to cybersecurity or to defence compete for that workforce? How do we get those two things together?
Well, I think, first of all, we are not, as Australia, the output from our universities and from our high schools is not enough in terms of the participation and interest in technology. It's not enough to supply. So we know that, at least for the short term, and hopefully for the short term, we are going to have to bring experts in from overseas. Very highly qualified, highly professional, valuable people coming to Australia. And I think the recent changes with the visa programs does show that we're listening to that and we're getting that. But that should not be the long-term solution. The long-term solution should be that we're able to build it here and grow the value that we have in the economy.
If you listen to the Australians podcast, you will have heard ads from Uber, who is conducting an absolute blitz in terms of advertising at the moment, which we absolutely love. But you hear actors and musicians and parents talking about how working for Uber is part of their life, that it's not their only income, but it's an important part of their flexible life. Dom, why the ad blitz? Who are you trying to reach, and what do you want them to know?
Well, as the Prime Minister alluded to, we're in the middle of a reform process for the gig economy. For the absolute avoidance of doubt, we're pro-reform. We think it's a good idea. We actually think it's a once-in-a-generation moment that we can modernise the Australian industrial relations system for a modern type of work. And essentially, we've got to get it right, though. And what we are trying to bring to life in the advertising that we're doing is what we think the vision of good looks like. And it's pretty simple. It's one, that we maintain the flexibility that people love about Uber. They come online when they want, log off when they want. Don't tell us if they're not going to work for a day or a week or a year. But we can start to overlay additional securities and benefits in the form of a universal safety net, which the Prime Minister aligned with, around minimum earning standards, minimum levels of insurance, access to the platform or loss of access. And really what we're trying to solve for here is saying, how do we rise the tide across all the players in the gig sector and ultimately improve the quality of work for gig workers here in Australia?
Richard, AI. How are you feeling about ChatGPT right now? I'm a bit nervous.
So first of all, I'm going to tell you that it's not intelligence. It's the AI is the big A, artificial, and a very tiny I, intelligence. It's not going to take over the world anytime soon, and we're not all going to die.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
So that's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an incredibly helpful adjunct to what you do. And people are scared about some of this stuff. They don't understand how quickly it's moving, and it's moving really quickly. But I think it's an iPhone moment. It is going to make a change. We are going to learn to leverage it. It's going to be very powerful. And there are things that it does incredibly well, and things that it does really, really badly as well. But it is a very powerful tool.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at all the 100,000 retailers in Australia that we see, 44% of them right now are investing in that area or investing in AI. And so I think it's something that's there. Are the retailers of Australia to become an evil empire and overtake the world with ChatGPT and all this stuff? No. But I think what they are going to do is remove a lot of toil and help their own employee base work smarter, harder. And if you think about on the consumer side, how their shoppers shop their websites and access information, I think there's a lot of interesting things there. My wife just started a small business. She started a multi-fashion retail store on Shopify just in November. And entering product descriptions is ad nauseam. It's like, so what have we built? We've used ChatGPT to help take that load off all of the merchants of Australia, and we can do it for you in a very intelligent way. And so there are use cases, I think, that free up creativity, free up manpower, free up resources to focus on other things.
Richard, Dom and Sean, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So some very strong messages from our leaders. The Prime Minister was optimistic but spoke about the need to be urgent in this economic environment. John Gray, the head of Blackstone, the need to be competitive, and our tech industry talking about the need to evolve to industrial relations and that changing environment. Thank you for joining us for Australia's Economic Outlook for this year, 2023.